Have you ever looked around at the people in charge, whether in politics, corporations, or even your own workplace, and thought, how did this person end up leading anyone? You're not alone. It's one of those things that seems so obvious, yet no one really wants to talk about it directly. The world often rewards the bold, not the wise, and sometimes the bold are just foolish. But this isn't a new problem. It's not a modern-day glitch in the system. In fact, over 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli, yes, that Machiavelli, was already studying this exact phenomenon. He understood that power doesn't always go to the most competent or the most moral. It often goes to the most shameless, the loudest, the most manipulative. So today, we're diving into a tough question. Why do the most foolish people so often end up in power? And why do the people who might actually make wise, thoughtful leaders often get pushed to the sidelines? Let's break it down. We tend to assume that people in power must know what they're doing. It's comforting. After all, nobody wants to think they're being led by someone clueless. But here's the thing, we confuse confidence with competence all the time. There's even a name for this, what psychologists call the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It's the idea that the less someone knows, the more likely they are to overestimate their abilities. Meanwhile, the more someone truly understands a subject, the more they doubt themselves. Why? Because the more you know, the more aware you become of how much you don't know. You hesitate, you think deeply, you see the risks and the grey areas. But foolish people, they don't have that burden. They charge ahead, loudly and without hesitation. And to the outside world, that can look like leadership. We mistake that loud certainty for clarity, for strength. And over time, those with the least insight can end up holding the most influence. It's like giving the steering wheel to the one person in the car who says, I totally know where I'm going, even if they have no idea. Let's bring in Machiavelli. In his infamous book, The Prince, he doesn't say be wise, be good, be humble. He says something closer to, if you want to survive in politics, be cunning, be ruthless if you have to. And whatever you do, don't show weakness. Now, this doesn't mean Machiavelli loved foolish leaders. Quite the opposite. He thought leaders should be strategic and pragmatic. But he saw something important. Appearances matter more than truth, especially in power. To quote him directly, it is not necessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. Translation? You don't need to actually be virtuous, you just need to look virtuous. You don't need to be competent, you just need to act like you are. That's the game, and the people who rise to power are often the ones willing to play it. So, what happens when you combine this with the Dunning-Kruger effect? You get a world where the most confident and often the least qualified are the ones who rise. Now let's flip the coin. What about the wise, the thoughtful, the deeply capable people who actually could lead with insight and care? They're often stuck in reflection. They hesitate. They ask questions like, am I really the right person for this? What if I fail? Do I have enough experience? And those questions? They're signs of wisdom. They're the signs of someone who understands the weight of responsibility. But in the world of power, especially in politics and corporate life, hesitation can be deadly. While one person is carefully weighing every angle, someone else is already making bold promises and climbing the ladder. So the paradox is this: the people most fit to lead are often too self-aware to seize power quickly, and the people most eager for power are often blind to their own limitations. It's not just a tragedy, it's a systemic flaw. Let's be real, we live in a world where image is everything. Turn on the news, scroll through social media, or sit through a political debate. It's not always the person with the best ideas who wins, it's the one who sells their ideas best. Charisma, sound bites, smiles, emotional appeal, all of it creates the illusion of leadership. And people eat it up. Why? Because most people don't have time to dig deep. They don't analyze policies or dissect motivations. They go with their gut. They respond to confidence. They respond to people who seem sure of themselves. And that opens the door for foolish people to climb very high, just because they look like they know what they're doing. Machiavelli would argue that this isn't a bug, it's a feature. He believed that leaders must master the art of appearances because perception shapes reality, and those who understand that rule can manipulate it to their advantage. So a foolish leader who knows how to look decisive, sound confident, and appear virtuous, that person might be far more successful than a genuinely wise person who looks unsure or speaks too cautiously. It's why image consultants exist, why spin doctors shape every public message, why politicians rehearse their facial expressions and posture before debates. It's all about managing perception. And in that game, foolishness isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's an advantage because the fool believes their own hype. And belief is contagious. Here's where things get darker. Once foolish people get into power, they tend to surround themselves with people who won't challenge them. They create echo chambers, environments where criticism is punished and blind loyalty is rewarded. And that creates a cycle. The wise get pushed out. The bold get promoted. The entire structure starts rewarding image over insight. Before long, entire institutions can be built on appearances and self-interest, while real wisdom gets buried under bureaucracy and spectacle. This isn't just a theory, we see it all the time. Companies that go bankrupt because of flashy CEOs, governments that collapse under their own corruption, communities that suffer because no one had the courage to challenge the loudest person in the room. It's not because the system is broken, it's because the system is tilted to favor the bold over the wise. Let's keep going. We've seen how the bold and foolish rise through confidence and charisma, but what about the other side of the equation? Why don't the wise fight harder? Why don't they speak up, take power, and try to fix things? The answer is complicated, because the wisest people aren't just quiet by accident. In many ways, their silence is a conscious choice, and in some ways it's a defense mechanism. Let's break down why. The more a person knows, the more they realize how complex everything really is. There are no easy answers. Every decision has trade-offs, every policy has unintended consequences, every solution creates a new set of problems. That's the burden of wisdom. So when a wise person is asked to lead, they don't say, "Yes, I'm perfect for this." They say, I don't know. There's a lot to consider. And in a world that moves fast and rewards confidence, that pause can cost them everything. Because while they're thinking it through, someone else is already grabbing the mic, making promises and winning hearts. Let's be honest, power doesn't just attract, it corrupts. And wise people know that. They've read history, they've seen what happens to people who get too close to power. The compromises, the temptations, the slow erosion of values. And so they hesitate. They think, do I really want to get involved in that mess? This is something Machiavelli wrestled with too. He didn't just glorify power, he understood its dangers. That's why The Prince is such a dark and morally grey book. It's a survival guide, not a celebration. And the wisest people? They're often more interested in living a good life than a powerful one. They value their peace, their integrity, their freedom. They'd rather build something meaningful in private than play a rigged public game. But in doing so, they often leave the stage empty for someone else to step in, someone less thoughtful, someone more reckless. Let's face it, power isn't just about ability, it's about strategy. Climbing to the top means making deals, forming alliances, smiling when you want to scream, and pretending to believe things you don't. Wise people, they usually hate that. They value authenticity. They value truth. And the political game, whether it's in government, business, or even community life, feels fake to them. So they opt out. And once again, that leaves the playing field to those who are willing to say anything, do anything, promise anything, even if they don't mean a word of it. Think about the last time you heard a calm, thoughtful, humble person in the spotlight. Now think about the last time you saw someone loud, flashy and polarizing grab attention. Which one went viral? Which one got the job offer? Which one raised more campaign money? We live in a world of noise, a world that rewards hot takes and dramatic sound bites. And in that world, the quiet voice of reason often gets drowned out. This isn't just a bug in the algorithm, it's a reflection of human psychology. We're drawn to certainty, to emotion, to performance. And that's a tragedy, because the people who truly understand the world, the ones who think deeply and speak carefully, are often the ones we never hear from. There's another reason the wise stay quiet: fear. Not fear of failure, but fear of being misunderstood. In a polarized world, even the most reasonable ideas can be twisted. One wrong phrase, one unpopular opinion, and suddenly you're labeled, cancelled, attacked. So many intelligent, thoughtful people look at the chaos and think, why bother? Why put myself out there? Why risk my reputation? Why scream into the void when no one is listening? They retreat. Not because they're weak, but because they're tired, disillusioned, wary. They know the cost of speaking out, and often they decide it's not worth it. Machiavelli might have understood this more than anyone. He wrote, "The Prince, not as a celebration of corruption, but as a warning, a brutal manual for how power actually works, not how we wish it would." And embedded in his work is a challenge to the wise. If you want to survive, you must learn the rules of the game, even if you hate the game. Because here's the harsh truth: if the wise stay out of politics, then only the unwise will be left to run things. If the good avoid power, the corrupt will take it. If the thoughtful keep silent, the loud will shape the world. Machiavelli didn't tell the wise to be evil, but he did tell them to be realistic, to understand that ideals mean nothing if you have no influence, and that sometimes you must pretend to be something you're not in order to do good. That's the Machiavellian paradox. So now we find ourselves in a strange place. The world is full of intelligent people, wise people, people with vision and compassion, but so many of them are invisible, quiet, disengaged. Meanwhile, the airwaves and headlines are dominated by those who mistake loudness for leadership and ego for vision, and we wonder why the world feels broken. It's not just that foolish people rise, it's that wise people retreat. And in the space between those two movements, chaos fills the gap. This is the crisis of leadership we're living through. In the modern world, everything is built for speed, quick decisions, instant gratification, short attention spans, TikToks, headlines, tweets. There's no room for nuance, no reward for complexity, no space for reflection. But wisdom lives in nuance, it grows in quiet, it thrives in reflection. And so by design, we're creating a world that pushes wisdom to the margins, that punishes depth, that treats quiet integrity as weakness, and in its place we elevate bravado, shallow certainty, overconfidence. That's how fools take power. Not because they're smarter, but because the system favors their strengths. Now that we understand the psychological and systemic reasons behind why fools often rise and the wise remain silent, it's time to ask a tougher question. What actually happens when the foolish take the reins of power? What are the consequences, not just for institutions and governments, but for everyday people like you and me? Because this isn't just an abstract theory. History is littered with examples where loud, overconfident, and underqualified leaders climbed their way to the top and left chaos in their wake. Let's take a closer look. Let's start with a classic metaphor: the emperor's new clothes. You probably know the story. An emperor is conned into believing he's wearing magnificent robes that only the wise can see. In truth, he's naked, but no one says anything because they're afraid of looking stupid. So the emperor walks through the streets, confident and proud, and everyone cheers, not because they admire him, but because they're too afraid to challenge him. This story is more than a children's fable. It's a parable of how foolish leaders maintain power through fear, silence, and illusion. Because when the emperor is bold enough to act like he's in control, people play along. And the longer the illusion holds, the harder it becomes to challenge. History has repeated this dynamic over and over. Let's talk about some real emperors, literal and figurative, who rose to power despite obvious flaws. Take Caligula, the Roman emperor, famous for erratic behavior, cruelty, and dangerous whims. At one point, he reportedly planned to appoint his horse as a senator, either as a joke, a power play, or simply madness. How did someone like that take power? Through inheritance, yes, but also through a system that rewarded loyalty over competence and crushed dissent. Or consider Idi Amin, the Ugandan dictator. a man who lacked formal education, had no meaningful governance experience and yet ruled with terrifying brutality. His reign was marked by paranoia, violence, and economic collapse. Then there's George W. Bush, not a tyrant, but often cited as someone whose overconfidence led to deeply flawed decisions. The Iraq War, launched under false pretenses and with a dangerous sense of certainty, is a modern example of how bluster can outweigh wisdom in policy making. And of course, Donald Trump, a leader whose rise was powered not by political experience or philosophical depth, but by charisma, media savvy, and an unshakable confidence in his own instincts. Regardless of where you fall politically, his presidency is a case study in how image, certainty, and populism can overpower complexity, nuance, and expertise. These are just a few. The list could go on. The pattern is consistent. When confidence outweighs competence, consequences follow. The damage isn't always immediate. Sometimes it takes years, even decades, for the cracks to fully show. Here's what happens when fools rule. Oversimplified solutions to complex problems. The world is complicated, but foolish leaders pretend it's simple. They offer black and white answers to grey problems. We'll fix the economy with one policy. We'll solve immigration with one wall. We'll heal society with one law. But these aren't real solutions, they're slogans. And slogans can't fix broken systems. Surrounding themselves with yes men. Foolish leaders don't like being challenged. They surround themselves with people who agree, flatter, and obey. The result? Echo chambers, groupthink, corruption. And without criticism, even small mistakes grow into disasters. Emotional, not strategic. Decisions? Many foolish leaders act from ego, from impulse. They make decisions based on how they feel in the moment, not what the long-term impact will be. They seek applause over effectiveness, popularity over legacy, and in doing so, they steer their nations or companies into storms they never saw coming. Public distrust and polarization. Foolish leadership often deepens societal divisions. They blame scapegoats, stir outrage, distract with drama. And over time, the public loses faith in leadership altogether. Cynicism grows, trust collapses. People stop believing that anyone in power can be decent or wise or honest. Yet this dynamic doesn't just exist in politics, it's everywhere, even in the corporate world. Think of that boss who got promoted because they talk a big game, not because they're good at their job. Think of the tech CEO who launches ambitious products that don't work, but gets endless media attention anyway. Think of the managers who take credit for others' work, make poor decisions, but climb the ladder faster than the quiet genius in the corner office. This is the same system at play. In many workplaces, the people who rise are those who play politics, not those who master the craft. And the more that happens, the more competence is devalued, and chaos becomes normalized. One of the most devastating consequences of foolish leadership is the waste of real potential. Every time a loud fool takes the stage, someone thoughtful is pushed off it. Every time a reckless decision is made, a careful plan is ignored. Every time we reward the shallow over the wise, we teach the next generation that depth doesn't matter. And slowly, culture shifts. People stop aspiring to be excellent. They just try to be visible. People stop building. They start performing. People stop asking, what's the right thing to do? And start asking, what will get me ahead? That's not just a leadership crisis, that's a cultural collapse. Again, Machiavelli understood this. He knew that politics is a performance, that truth is powerless without a platform, and that image often wins over substance. But he also believed this: if you want to do good, you must first learn how the game works, because if you don't, someone else will, and they might not have good intentions. So the question becomes, can a wise person learn to appear foolish? Can they learn to play the game, not out of ego, but out of necessity? That's the final piece of the puzzle, because it's not enough to complain about bad leaders. The real challenge is this: how can good people win power without becoming corrupted in the process? So here we are. We've talked about how foolish people rise to power. We've seen how confidence can trump competence, how charisma can overpower substance, and how the system seems rigged against the wise and thoughtful. But now comes the hardest question of all. What can be done about it? Can a wise person ever rise to power without compromising who they are? Can they learn to play the game just enough to win, without losing their soul in the process? Let's talk about that. So how do you lead without becoming the very thing you hate? The answer isn't to abandon who you are, it's to become strategically authentic. That means speaking in ways that resonate with people, even if they're simplified versions of your deeper thoughts, choosing which battles to fight and which ones to let go, learning how to frame your values in a language that people can actually hear. Wise people often lose, not because they're wrong, but because they speak in a way that no one understands or connects with. It's not enough to be right. You have to sound right. That doesn't mean lying. It means communicating with clarity, emotion, and presence, without dumbing things down, but also without getting lost in abstraction. It's what great leaders like Lincoln, Mandela, and even MLK mastered. They were philosophers in disguise, wrapping complex truths in simple, powerful language. One reason the foolish crave power is because they see it as an end, a trophy. But the wise must see power as a means, a tool. You don't need power to inflate your ego. You need it to protect what matters, to guide the future, to build something that lasts beyond your lifetime. This shift in mindset is key, because if you see power as a reward, you'll compromise anything to get it. But if you see power as a responsibility, you'll know when to pursue it and when to walk away. The world needs leaders who see power not as something to own, but as something to steward. Another challenge for the wise is this: storytelling. Fools rise because they tell compelling stories, even if those stories are lies. So if you want to change the world, you must change the narrative. You must tell better stories. Stories rooted in truth, in justice, in vision. Stories that give people hope and clarity. Plato once said, "Those who tell the stories rule society." He was right. If you want the wise to lead, they must learn to tell the stories that inspire action, not just contemplation, because the world won't follow wisdom it can't feel. Finally, we must ask, how do we change the systems that keep rewarding the wrong people? This is slow work, cultural work, generational work. But here are a few ideas. Redefine leadership. Stop idolizing loudness. Start celebrating depth. Teach kids that true strength lies in self-control, humility, and insight. Reward thoughtful decisions. In organizations and governments, build processes that value long-term thinking, not short-term wins. Cultivate new gatekeepers. The media, education, and technology industries all shape who we see as leaders. We need gatekeepers who value substance over spectacle. Encourage the wise to step up. Don't let the best minds opt out. Support them, mentor them, help them find the courage to lead, even when the game feels broken. Because if we don't change the structure, the same pattern will repeat. In the end, the biggest challenge facing the wise isn't the fools, it's fear. Fear of the spotlight, fear of power, fear of becoming what they hate. But if good people refuse to lead, the space will always be filled by those who shouldn't. So maybe the call today is simple. If you see clearly, speak louder. If you think deeply and stand taller. If you understand the world, dare to shape it. Put on the mask if you must. Learn the language of power if you must. But don't disappear, because the world doesn't just need clever rulers. It needs wise warriors willing to step into the arena, not to dominate, but to guide. Not to win for themselves, but to build something better for everyone else. Let's leave it here. Foolish people end up in power, not because they're better, but because they're bolder. If the wise don't match that boldness, not in ego, but in resolve, the cycle won't break. So if you've ever felt like you see things more clearly than others, maybe that clarity is not a curse. Maybe it's a call to rise, not with arrogance, but with purpose, to be both a fox and a lion, to be both kind and strategic, to be both honest and persuasive. Because in the end, those who can balance the inner world of wisdom with the outer world of power are the ones who change history. And maybe, just maybe, that person is you.